Okay, so to recap, In His Presence, Edgar Cayce on from A Search for God material. And of course, from the disclaimer, want to make sure that ask any questions you want, but I don't speak officially for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, but I'll answer any questions that come up, and I'll give you copies of the materials right down to the entire PowerPoint for allowing you to go ahead and do your own study into the future and into the subject. So what does it mean to live in His presence? I kind of, it's a humorous approach to start with the picture here of Jesus is coming, look busy. I can't tell you how many times I've felt that way when I would speak to traditional Christians in the neighborhood, with the other kids that is growing up, because it was almost as if, well, let's go behind the barn, if we're going to go try to smoke a cigarette, because God doesn't look there. And I've never understood that, but I have had a lot of traditional Christians that raise their children with, how would you feel if the Lord came back down to earth right now and saw you doing what you're doing? I'm thinking, this would be wonderful. It'd be absolutely wonderful if Jesus showed back up again. But what if He saw what you're doing? Well, He's watching what we're all doing every single moment anyway. Why do you think that this is going to be a particular time that makes things stick out like that? And so it was very clear to me, even at an early age, that there was this separation in a traditional Christian and even other religions. There's this separation between ourselves and God that we can actually, like Adam felt, I could go hide from God in the Garden of Eden. Remember, after he ate the apple and he started feeling fear and guilt and shame, and he tried to hide from God. And you're going, did you really think you could do that? Even God says, did you really think you could do that? And of course you can't. And Adam, in his clearer mind, doesn't stop you from trying to hide from God, but you realize that doesn't necessarily happen. So starting, just a brief recap, the 262-33 means 262 indicates it's a search for God reading. 33 is the 33rd consecutive reading given on that subject matter. And I have the date there, December 4th, 1932, letting you know the time that this information was disseminated. So in that reading, starting with paragraph 6, there was a question. And this question was coming generally from the Search for God group, the members. Please expand on how we may come into the realization of His presence. Answer: as we have given above, the greater fault from the realization is that His presence is kept a thing apart. He wills that all should come to the knowledge of His presence abiding with all. We come to this knowledge and consciousness by doing those things that are conducive to bringing into every atom of our being that which gives the attributes of His presence in the earth. And in doing this, do we come to know His presence. I'm one that tends to click on those things like with Yahoo News or MSN.com or that sort of thing, and they had, 30 fascinating things about the world that you probably didn't know. Well, they had one that just impressed the heck out of me, and I didn't know it, but I know it now, assuming it's true. That is, if you were to take all of the atoms that comprise the world, all of us, the chairs, table, floor, the earth, the mantle, the core, all of it, and you were to take the space out between them, so you have an atom here, atom here, atom here, and you bring them all into one place, did you know that it would not be an area or ball any bigger than a grain of sand? That is unbelievable to me. I mean, when I looked at that, I said, really? So you go check it someplace else? Yeah, it says that's absolutely the truth. So when it sits here and it says, conducive to bringing every atom of our being, and we think the world is such a huge place, every atom of our being, well, from one perspective, it's no bigger than a grain of sand, this entire planet that we're living on. Imagine what it looks like when you have the whole universe, sitting there in front of you. So trying to add scale to this is really interesting. But to understand how do we come to that knowledge and consciousness that brings Him into our presence. I'm reminded of it's kind of an anecdote, if you will, from Japan. And they would ask all of the great Japanese artists, especially those that would make statues, how do you make the perfect statue? And the answer is very simple. You start with a big block of, say, marble, and you take away everything that doesn't look like the statue that you want. You just chip everything else away, and that's what you have. Well, I would tend to say, in trying to bring him into our presence, or his presence, make it one with us, all we have to do is remember that we were created in God's perfect image. In other words, sitting underneath all of these human bodies and the other forms that we may take on in the universe and throughout eternity, there is this perfect image that we were created in. And so all we have to do is take away all of the things that are not of God, and the next thing you know, you're left with how God created us to begin with. There's another, this is going to sound like a semantic trick with words, but it's actually very true. This comes from the Cayce readings. It also comes from The Matrix, the movies. And that is, they make the statement that says, everything that has a beginning also has an end. Everything that has a beginning also has an end. Well, one reason, even though each and every one of us has the free will to do as we want, our selfish thoughts had a beginning. And if our selfish thoughts do not come from God and they have a beginning, they eventually have an end, logically. It's not just a semantics trick, it's just a matter of how long do we want to be miserable. If we want to be miserable for a longer period of time, then that's our free will and we can do that. But as the Cayce readings put it, how long can we resist the unconditional love of our Maker? So it's inevitable in the idea that we were created perfect. Like, salmon that want to return to their spawning grounds, we have this natural desire to go back to the perfection that we were created in. We have the free will to keep us apart from God, but it is so natural that our draw to that and seeing how living a life of unconditional love works well for us and works for everybody else, it's just going to happen at some point in the future. We're going to get tired of being miserable, and we're going to see how well everything else works. So once you start making some better choices in your life and you start watching that work for the greater good of all, it starts this vicious cycle in a very positive or spiritual direction than some of the vicious cycles we start in our lives the other way. Continuing on in a different paragraph of the same reading, 26232, the mental world is looking to the spiritual minded for hope. To those who are in their material walks representatives of the spiritual forces in the thinking people, or that thought that will guide all men closer to his presence. Now, what is this talking about? You've heard it not just from Cayce, but a lot of other New Age or metaphysical trains of thought talk about receiving help from guides and angels on the other side. I don't know if I see a few head shakes there. Yes, that have heard of that before. What's the difference between having help on the other side from a guide or an angel? An angel is simply what you would think. It is a messenger from God. It is a being created by God that has absolute free will, but only free will to make choices in accord with God's loving ways, unlike us. And that's where guides come in. Guides wind up being souls on the other side. For instance, Mother Teresa would be a guide on this side of the world. She's a soul that's dedicated to, or was dedicated to helping others along their spiritual path. And so guides on the other side are people just like we have sitting here who have passed over, and one of the things they want to do is to act as a guide, as a spiritual whisper in their ear to be able to help them along their path. Well, that's what they're talking about in this reading when it says the mental world is looking to the spiritual minded for hope. In other words, all of us on the other side who are over there hoping to try to make for a kinder, gentler, greater earth are looking for people who are able to take that consciousness, that frame of mind, when they incarnate into a human body, and they work with them to try to bring heaven to earth, to try to facilitate God's loving ways that are out here. So you can see, for the longest time it was difficult to understand how this works until mankind's technology started catching up with us. And the technology is a video game. Are you aware that you can actually sit in your living room with video games and be playing people all over the rest of the world at the same time? you're all sitting there and you've gone to this virtual reality of this, land, and it could be in the Renaissance or the prehistoric period or some future time, and you assume these characters, and like in the Dark Ages or something, you could be or like hobbits, and elves and orcs and dwarves and magicians and all of that. And people go into the game and they assume a different kind of personality, kind of like we come into these lives and we assume different personalities, whether we're going to be, people that are the thinking or the laborers or the soldiers of war or whatever it winds up being. And so the virtual reality games that they have put together makes it very clear what's happening to us now. You realize we're all sitting on our couches in some ethereal home on the other side with a game controller that's controlling our bodies. I know it's an odd way to think about it, but this is not who we are. This is like a pair of clothes that we put onto our consciousness to be able to project ourselves into 3 dimensions and be able to have the limitations that we do here. Why do we want limitations? This is an interesting question, because why would we want to be able to make it to where we have these physical bodies that we have to take care of? Can you imagine being on the other side when we don't have a physical body to take care of, and we don't have a mortgage to pay and a job to go to earn the money to be able to feed ourselves so that we don't die? You know what happens? Every time the least little bit thing goes wrong, you leave. You're out of there. You go, I'm done with this. I'm going to go on to the next experience. Well, the problem is you go to the next experience and something starts to go wrong again. And the next experience that you run to after that, you run into people who are the same sons of guns who just aren't playing right, and they upset you. And you don't actually realize that maybe you're the one commonality as you run from place to place to place that makes it so that things don't necessarily work out. And the problem is, because you have no reason to stick around, you keep running to the next experience, nobody ever stops to sit there and say, I'm the problem. I need to work on me. I need to be able to fix what's inside of me, and then guess what? I can go everywhere, and I will get along great with everybody. Now that gets solved on Earth, because if we don't stick together around here, we get eaten. I mean, when you have carnivores out there, we're at the top of the food chain because it does take a village. It does take all of us working together, and in so doing, we overcome the environment. We overcome the elements. We become the top of the food chain. But it also gives you a mortgage. It gives you a family and children and all the rest of that stuff that says, I can't run anymore. I need to sit right here and work this out with every single person. Well, eventually. It's not that we don't still run, but obviously you need to go out there, and we are more compelled to be able to do it. And the limitation of time is that we get to see, if you want friends, you need to be friendly. If you want love, you need to be loving. These connections that say what I do is causing what happens to me in the future or after that are definitely the cause and effect of my life. And that's how you get to learn within the earth. So why do we bring on these limitations? Because now we blocked out all of eternity happening at once. We blocked out our ability to run away from our problems as much as we certainly could otherwise. And it makes us focus on the things that we came in to work on in this lifetime. So in trying to imagine all of these people in the spiritual world who are pulling for us here, who are actually guides, giving us constant guidance, whispering in the ear, listening to that still small voice while we're in prayer and meditation to give us the next steps on the path. Let me be persistent and keep my sights on that above, that I am ever contending in his name. Do we ever think about, I'm representing God? I mean, that's kind of that thing behind the barn. Is there ever a time that we're not representing God? And you're going, well, we're all representing God. And so it's not that big a deal. No, it's a very big deal. If you stop and think about it for a moment, you're going, if I'm trying to put my best foot forward and I don't want to make God look bad, then I'm definitely going to have a second thought about how I might have a knee-jerk reaction in a negative way to another person. And so if I'm persistent and I always keep a higher perspective on things, and I say, I really want to make God look as good as possible through the choices that I make, then that is definitely the way to go. So one of the things that happens is that when we go ahead and look at things from the idea of comparing ourselves, keeping up with the Joneses or comparing ourselves with the other people on the block or our friends or whatever the peer group happens to be, we really do get in trouble. And the reason being is we'll look at it and say, well, I'm doing better than all of my other people around me, my peer group, so I must be doing okay. And that's really setting yourself for a low bar. I mean, all of a sudden you got a bar here and all you have to do is step over it like that and you think you're doing great just because that's the bar that other people are having trouble getting by. The one I'm trying to remember who said it the first time that made me laugh and I hung on to it. They said that using everybody around you, your peer group around you, as the people that you really want to impress or get into the good crowd with, he said it's like trying to make sure that you've got a seat at the cool table in the insane asylum. It really does throw you when you're going, oh, but we're in an insane asylum. Oh, well, that's not all that impressive. Do we think that this earth is any different than an insane asylum? From a godly perspective, from a perfection standpoint, when you look at what we're doing to each other down here on this planet, we're pretty much insane. We're not playing with a full deck. And so you're going, okay, you're one of the more spiritual people in that insane asylum down there. Congratulations. Is that as high a bar as you want to jump over, or do you really want to achieve the potential that you were created to have? And so when you see a statement like this and you realize this is why it's so important to not just go with keeping up with the Joneses or doing better than my friends, but literally setting your sights on the highest ideal. Back to 26213 in paragraph 15. Well, I don't think I pointed this out this time. Whenever I have bolding and underlining, that is my emphasis on it. It is not from the readings. If you were to have a word that is in all caps, not just a capitalized word, but in all caps, that would be a word that when Cayce was giving it, he had an emphasis on that particular word. If you see in all caps up there, it's kind of like in emails. All caps means you're yelling. It's kind of, I don't mean meanly, but but it definitely has an emphasis on it. So for all our witnesses unto the effect of his presence in our lives, so do the expressions in word, in thought, in deed, reflect whether we are conscious of his presence abiding. I think almost everybody will have stories from their life in which it really wound up that you could just feel the presence of God and what a difference it made. What a life-changing experience it can be when you become absolutely convinced, not only of God's presence, but of this very famous question that I'll bring up now. It was phrased, the first time I heard of it was with Albert Einstein. He said, if you could ask God just one question, what would it be? The answer is that. Is the universe friendly? That's a well thought out question because the answer to that question lays everything else out. If the universe is indeed friendly, then that means that God isn't trying to go through and play gotcha. You didn't answer the Jesus saved, as my Lord and Savior question right, and therefore you were condemned to eternal hell. I mean, if we're not playing gotcha, if the answer of what we are doing here is to try to once again become one with God and manifest his unconditional love in our lives, and the universe is friendly about how we go about that, then the answer to every question in our mind is going to be positive. Why is this happening to me? Because you are being given an opportunity to be able to face and work through something that's a challenge in your life right now. And if I do it right this time, I don't have to do it again. It's not going to hurt me anymore to wind up dealing with this after I've got a handle on it. It's kind of like an alcoholic winds up having a heck of a time not taking a drink until they don't need to anymore. As soon as they really have learned that lesson, they just walk away from it, and that's the heck with it. Or you can talk about do I have any vegetarians in here? So you wind up, you can understand it. If I have vegetarians in the group and I say, how do you feel when you smell bacon frying? And they look at you and go, It doesn't mean anything to them. But if you're a meatitarian, you wind up, I love the smell of bacon frying in the morning. You go, wow, I really feel. How many of you want to jump up and go score some crack cocaine in downtown Phoenix right now? And you'd look at me like, I have no desire to do that. Exactly, that's not one of the things that we're hung up on in here. And yet I can tell you, if I had a crack cocaine addict, there could be nothing else they're thinking of instead of trying to deal with that very issue, whatever it is that we get ourselves caught up into. So every one of us is a witness to our own personality, our own little particular challenges that we have in life, and being able to say, this is how God interacts with the rest of the universe through me. One of the things that I'll share with you a story. In fact, I was talking with Kay about this before I started doing the recording. And so if you grow up a little different from other people, or it doesn't necessarily need that pre-qualifier, but I have a very active mind. And I was raised on the Cayce readings. My mother was reading There Is a River when she was pregnant with me. So this has been the thing that I've been raised with. And of course, when you are given things like everybody is an unconditionally loved child of God, here's this whole thing about reincarnation, and what we are here to do is to be able to manifest God's love in our lives to the point where we are no longer entrapped here on the earth. And I get all these things and I go, and what happens from there? And so, well, then you get to go on and do anything you want throughout the rest of eternity. Well, the problem is when you have a mind that can start to try to go out into eternity, but you're 6, and I'm making these permutations going out into eternity, and I don't have enough life experience to say that things would never get boring. I honestly have this gut feeling of, at some point in eternity, we have to run out of things to do. And this feeling of foreboding, it's because when you're 6, the last thing you want to be is bored. You ever see a little kid go in, plumps down on the couch, and they go, I'm bored. Trust me, that's one of the worst things a little kid's going through. And I could remember that. I'm going, I hate being bored just about worse than anything, and yet it seems that for eternity and without stopping, we will be bored forever. That seems inevitable, that we're going to run out of things to do if you have all of eternity. And then when you say, well, I'm going to go do it again, well, fine. And there's still more time after that and after that. You see where my head went into this endless loop that just brought an incredible fearfulness. I mean, I could just feel a ball of adrenaline get tied up inside of me. It'd make me just want to jump up and try to go run it off or something. And my parents never really understood of course, I had a vocabulary of a 6-year-old, so it was very hard to explain what was going on in my head. And I can tell you that feeling was irrational, but it stayed with me for many years, even decades into the future. And I remember I was there one day I was on my own and in the house, and I was playing the stereo. And I was playing a song, I don't know if you've ever heard it, In the Hall of the Mountain King from Peer Gynt. It's kind of an ominous tune. I don't have an audio of it, or I play it for you, but it really is this very stirring piece of music. And every time I listen to this thing, it just really lifts me up, and I take off with it. And my mind, as I was going through that, and listening to it, I said, I could last an eternity feeling as I do right now, and that would be enough. That I wouldn't feel like I was missing out. I just love that, that song, that harmony, that music that went along so much that would be enough. And then I started getting other thoughts in my head that said, do the math of if there are an eternal or an infinite number of souls and an infinite number of dimensions or realms that we can interact in, when will you run out of things to do? All right, well, infinity times infinity is infinity. You don't ever run out of things to do. I went, you're saying that you'll never run out of things to do? And I got this voice in my head that said, no, I'm saying the opposite. I'm telling you, not only are there an infinite number of things to do, but guess what? You get to the presence of God's abiding love, and you are actually in that communing situation. That is enough to go throughout eternity. You don't need to do anything. You will absolutely be more than you can imagine satisfied to do absolutely nothing abiding in his presence. And yet, Guess what? You have an infinite number of things to do on top of that. I'm going, now I've got it. Now I've got it. It never bothered me again from that point on. And believe me, that was a major turning point of what happens when you wind up becoming a witness to what happens when you manifest his presence in your life. Different reading 26233. There is no power, no strength, save in him. That puny strength man may assert in the power of his own manhood is but the shadow. Now, that was an emphasized word, being in all caps. Is but the shadow of that shown by him in the ways that lead to the thoughts of everyday action. So what we become so unclear on, we feel like the people who have the most power, whether it's in politics or something, or in the entertainment business, or how much money somebody has, gives them greater effect on other people because of the stature or assets that they own. And you have to take a look. Did Jesus ever run for an elected office? Nope. Was he particularly wealthy? Nope. Did he ever lack for anything? Nope. It's a fascinating thing to look at that man's life and say, everybody just made sure that Jesus had everything that he needed to accomplish what he was here to do, because of the people that are of the like mind trying to usher in a much more loving place around us because of the choices we make in each one of our lives. One of the stories of my life that I had to, and it was something that I had to learn, and again, it's when you finally get his presence to be matching what you believe with how you think, feel, and act. There were a number of years that I went to a metaphysical chiropractor. And yes, would he manipulate your spine and all that? And yeah, but that was very secondary. That man could answer any question you wanted. You would lay face down on his table, and he would literally grab your feet and start moving them back and forth. And he'd do that with the right heel. And he would be answering questions that you would ask him based on he's asking your soul. And he would feel by the resistance in your foot, if you were to say, how many years would it be for this? And he'd start doing it until he hit resistance, and he'd count them like a horse, pawing in the dirt or something like that. Or if it was a yes or no, he'd feel whether there was resistance or not for a yes or no answer from the foot. It took me years to find this out because I had no idea what he was doing at first. I'm going, I don't want to ask. I don't want to know. It's just too odd. But there was... finally asked him a much better question, and this is where I learned how to understand the best use of psychics. Telling you what's going to happen in the future, telling you, is this choice or this choice better to make, those are silly questions. Don't even bother asking them because they don't help you to grow spiritually at all. But I did say, if there is a lesson that I really could use at this moment in my life, can you tell me what it is? Now that is a question. It's like, is the universe friendly? The answer changes everything. Can you give me a piece of advice right now that would help me? And I was certainly in a stressful time. And that was when it came back, and he says, you don't get any extra points by not asking for help. Now, for me, that was profound. Because I'll tell you, when you were raised by my mother, you definitely stand on your own 2 feet. There was no question that you are a child of God. You have absolutely everything within you to be able to make this happen. You don't need any help to do anything whatsoever. You have all of this potential within you. Go ahead and tap into that. And so I got into the habit of never asking for help. If you don't get any extra points by doing it by not asking for help, I'm very much in favor of asking for help now. I ask for help a lot. But it was the implied lesson by being brought up by somebody who had the same issue I did. That she wanted to do everything on her own, feeling like all I can do is, it's you and me, God, and we're going to make this thing happen. We don't need any help from anyone else. And so when you wind up being able to say, I don't have any power, I don't have any strength, it's all coming from God, and God can only reach me through my own negativity, the things that I have my own blind spots here, can reach me by getting somebody like your metaphysical chiropractor to say this to you, that you don't get any extra points by doing it on your own. So we really would do well to make sure that we understand what it means of ourselves we can do nothing. Doesn't mean that none of us are worth a darn. What it means is that all of us can do everything if we will open ourselves to it. So I don't know if you're familiar with he's kind of a spiritual guru, John Eldridge. He's not so popular today, but was for a long time. Security is not found in the absence of danger, but in the presence of Jesus. I can tell you that one of the notes I have here to tickle my memory has to do is, are there any atheists in foxholes? You find yourself in the midst of, a World War battle going on with all the bullets and tanks and bombs and everything else going on around you, and it's got you just freaked out. And does an atheist really sit there and not think, well, what's next? Because it doesn't look like this is going to last for too much longer, what I have here in front of me. And so I really have to say, at what point does that not become a vital piece of information up there? If we're talking about security and said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And one of the things that you have to get in touch with there is that the soul is eternal. If the soul is eternal, that means that I can't be killed. Can this human body be destroyed? You're absolutely right, it can. Especially in that foxhole, it could be gone the next second. But if you get a better handle on it, to understand that, no, I'm really not in as if I stop measuring things as my peer group does, it says, how much money do I have? How happy am I? How long am I living in this lifetime? Those are not the highest priorities that we have in terms of how we would measure spiritual growth in our lives. So when you stop for a second, even if you're in the worst midst of everything in the foxhole, God help me. God help me right here. And I guarantee you, with the exact, shall I say, force and sincerity that you've asked for that help, you'll receive your answer. You'll receive that calm that passes, that peace that passes understanding when you get in that point. And once you do get that calm, that's when you start asking questions about what's good about this? How can I make the best outcome from the circumstances that I have right now? Because there'll never be a better time than when you finally found that place of calm and you're getting that help and you're open to it, that you are able to go ahead and open your mind to the things that God would share with you. A longer one here. This is paragraph 7 on reading 33. Please expand on how we may prepare ourselves that we may abide in his presence. Now remember, this is the entire study group, maybe about 10 people at that point, that were working with Edgar Cayce. From the readings, the answers that he gave here, they wrote these books. So Cayce's answer was, this would refer rather to the individual experience, for in the preparations of self, there are varied consciousnesses, and what to one might be necessary, to another would be secondary. Remember, the question is, how do we prepare ourselves? And said, I can't give a blanket answer to that. What's going to be right for you is not right for you. You and you and you, everybody's going to have a different way to go about this. And so what do you do from there? That which may be the attribute of good judgment, clean living, without thought of same being a command or a law of universal nature, yet as we, as individuals, become more and more conscious through meditation and prayer, notice the all caps, meditation and prayer and application of that we seek in the way of preparation. So the one thing that Cayce is giving that every single person needs to do to accomplish having him in our presence, in our lives, manifesting through us, meditation, prayer, application. Now, I don't know how much if maybe in other readings of Edgar Cayce, if it's ever become clear, but prayer is talking with God, meditation is listening to God. That's just very simply what the readings give you on that. So prayer is the time where you put yourself in a tune to make a connection with that divine within. And so you open your heart and mind and set aside, that conscious mind as much as you can to be able to say, I really want to have that Peer Gynt in the Hall of the Mountain King experience where I just sit there and I'm going, this is awesome. I am feeling the presence, the love of God. I am seeing that everything is absolutely okay right now and that God doesn't hate me. It doesn't matter how many terrible things I've done, even how many terrible things I've done today. I am really in good accord with God. And then once you get to that point where you feel that, then you go into that meditation in which not only have you made the connection, that's where you say, God, what do I do about this problem that's been vexing me? What do I do about this? And believe me, the answers that come to you are going to sound like they're just thoughts. On the wings of your own thoughts is the way it comes back to you. If you expect to hear this, John, big voice coming out, that's not the way it happens. It comes to you on the wings of your own thoughts but you have opened your mind to that kind of information. I actually wrote a whole book called Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled on using this, what's called inspirational writing method. 80% of what's in that book I already knew before I started writing the book. The other 20% fascinates me. Because I was writing things that I didn't even know, but I'd pose the question and it'd start coming through. Believe me, it took me years to be able to learn how to do that in constant practice of going into that prayer, then meditation, asking the questions and trying to flow through as far as the information that comes out. If you get to that point, you will never need to ask for a psychic reading again. It all comes through you because the kingdom of God is within, and all of our answers are sitting within each one of us because we were created in God's perfect image. So you wind up having very few absolutes, but where it applies to everybody. But if meditation and prayer, I mentioned, what's the application? The application is when you start doing things that really don't make sense in secular society. One of the easiest ones to understand has to do with prosperity. If you want prosperity in your life, according to the Cayce readings, you treat it as you do a feather coming into your hand. You go ahead and open your hand and gently allow it to float down into your hand. You start trying to grasp it, and you know what happens. Your very effort pushes the stuff away in front of you right there. And so I know from if you were to go to a secular, atheistic CPA and go, what is the best way for me to be able to solve my prosperity problems? I have nothing but poverty following me around. And they go, well, maybe you might want to start giving away 10% of all your money. You're going, oh yeah, now that makes sense. It just makes no sense whatsoever from a secular standpoint. But until we can get ourselves into the flow of everything, being given to us, we give to others, goes right on through again and again and again, until you can get a handle on that, then it is always going to elude us. That's probably one of the easiest applications to be able to understand, that we should constantly give where we are being spiritually fed from. So if we understand that, then it doesn't matter what all of those other individual perspectives, we'll find what works for us to become better people. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Of course, that's a Bible quote from Matthew 5:16. Cayce referred to it a number of times in his readings as well. But the interesting part of this, and one reason I bring that quote out, is because of the word glorify. The word glory in the Cayce readings means the ability to serve. I know if you look this up in Webster's, it's not going to have that definition to it. But the ability to serve is what the word glory means in and of itself. Now, interestingly enough, especially from the Cayce perspective, that doesn't mean that we just glorify God, because we hear that all the time, that we would be of service to anything that is interesting to God. If God wants to be able to promote something, that's where we should glorify God by being of service through that. You realize that it also means it works in the other direction, that God glorifies us. God gives us the ability to serve. He presents that opportunity to serve in our jobs, in our homes and families, in the recreation that we do, and the things that we volunteer for, and just letting somebody into our lane in the freeway. All of these are the ability to serve, is all part of the same wonderful unconditional love cycle. Let each, in the light of their understanding, so live that they bespeak, that they profess with their lips to believe, that others may know that individual is keeping that presence they hold as their ideal in such a direct consciousness as to be a living example of that they profess. One of the this is sharing some anecdotes out of my life. I was probably about 9 years old, and my mother had a Edgar Cayce study group in her home. when I was, especially when I was young, if I would get ill, I had a terrible illness pattern, and I would get sick. I would get a sore throat to where I couldn't swallow without it truly, truly hurting. And I would get a 104-degree temperature, and it would last for 3 or 4 days. And I was just getting into that. It was in my first day of, the sore throat had already hit, and the fever was on its way up. And this person that was in my mother's study group had the ability to do laying on of hands healing. When I'm 9, I don't know what that means. All right? So there I am, not really happy because I'd actually gotten to sleep when my mother came in and woke me up. And she goes, "We're going to do this healing prayer, laying on of hands." I went, "Huh?" I have no idea what that means. She goes, "All you have to do is just lie there, but I want you to be awake." I'm like, well, whatever. And so this guy, he puts his hands, not touching me, but just over my throat. And I'd say this whole thing took place inside of 5 to 10 minutes. And I could actually feel the heat radiating off of his hands and feeling it on my throat. And so I'm just lying there, and I'm not really noticing the difference, but the thing that I was noticing is that I needed to swallow. Swallowing was not fun, and I braced myself for it, and I swallowed, and it didn't hurt. So in 5 or 10 minutes, I had, through a laying on of hands healing, had gone through this healing cycle that normally would have taken me 3 or 4 days to get through. I swallowed again. It didn't hurt. And then I swallowed again. I said, "It doesn't hurt." Now, here is something that was absolutely vital to my upbringing. And that is, what do you think they said? "Oh my God, it's a miracle." No. Didn't happen that way at all. What happened was they went, "Of course. Of course." What do you think the difference between those two reactions are? How much do you believe in the automatic healing of somebody being able to do that when they come back with, "Of course," instead of, "Oh my God, it's a miracle, we're shocked. How could that ever possibly be?" I had it so reinforced in me at that point when I'm 9 years old and I go through this experience and went, "Oh, well, this is the normal course of things. All this stuff that I'm being raised with and we're always talking about, this is how it works." I can't tell you how foundational that was for me to believe in everything else that went along with it from that point. I just don't, I don't have any doubts in my mind that you probably could come up with, if you were raised in a different way. You go, "Oh, well, maybe that's true and maybe it's not." No, I absolutely was raised having no doubt in the concepts of what I talk about from up here. Maybe it comes across that way. My wife says, "You sound way too sure of yourself sometimes." So you wind up, I remember I was so surprised when I was on the national board for the Association for Research and Enlightenment as a trustee, and I was on the membership committee. And I remember a gentleman came in who was also another board member, and he was trying to present this idea that he had for fundraising. And the it was called the Golden Circle Club. And the Golden Circle Club was a club that you would become a member of if you gave, I don't know, $1,000 or more a year to the organization. And I was just sitting there going, and what does club membership, get you? Oh, well, there would be special dinners, in which you would be invited to come in and you would have, whether it was Charles Thomas, he had passed away at that point, but Charles Thomas would be able to speak. Gladys Davis was gone by then too. So Charles Thomas was all the original Cayce legacy that was alive at the time. Edgar's younger son, Edgar Evans Cayce, was still alive. So they're saying, you get to have special dinners and you'll be able to have a smaller group and be able to mingle with these people. And of course your name will be put in the magazine as being a member of the Golden Circle Club. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. I'm going, if we are asking people for money with the incentive of you're going to get something that other people don't in this spiritual organization, and you are going to be uplifted by having your name in association with this thing, that's actually appealing to some of the baser instincts in humankind rather than asking to support this organization that is so worthy of our financial support. And that man looked at me and he did not like that, my response, and of course I lived in Anaheim, California at the time, and he lived in Chicago, and he says, well, I would expect that perspective coming from somebody who lives on the wrong side of the San Andreas Fault. I can say that story now. He's passed away a long time ago. But I was just in shock. I'm going, not only did you come up with this idea for raising money that, that goes in that direction, but it also, your response to me right there was not, maybe I was a little bit strong there myself, but boy, I wasn't casting aspersions on you personally, just the motivations. I didn't even believe that if you raised money that way, that you raised it with a vibration that was going to do any good for the organization. You know what I'm saying? It'd be like the Catholic Church getting money from the mafia, going, you really think that money's going to do any good for you? You can make something out of it, but how permanent or how uplifting would you be able to use that kind of money? But I do think, the other thing, because, my mother certainly gave a lot of money to the ARE over all the years, but she was really a full-time volunteer, and I mean full-time as in more than 40 hours a week. She volunteered to this organization. And when was it I went back? They had a grand reopening of their, they did a $7 million remodel of the place, so obviously they are getting financial help. So I went to see this $7 million remodel of the thing, and I'm walking, I don't know if you could Google it and be able to see the headquarters, and they have this nice staircase. It's not really a staircase, just steps going on up. And then when you get up to the top, there's this flat area that has these bricks that are in memory of, all the people that have helped all the time. So I go right up to the top, and the first brick I see is my mother's. I had no idea it was there. I really didn't. I'm going, oh. You look at that, you see that right there, and you're going, this is where the recognition comes in. For all of the work that she had done, it didn't matter how much money she'd given or the hours, it was just recognition that all things eventually work to good. And so we have Christine Caine, she's a motivational speaker. Spending time in the presence of Jesus is a non-negotiable. Don't wait until you have time to do it. Make time. This is, a matter of fact, when we were talking with Kay earlier, she was mentioning a challenge in times of meditation at this same meeting when people were firing questions to Edgar Cayce, Edgar Cayce, who sold his son. He was really doing a pitch for joining the ARE Edgar Cayce study group. And in fact, Bob and Rose Farrow, the ones that run them here when Steve and I are not doing the summer relief program for them. And he was saying you really need to get into the study group. And the reason why study groups are so important to Yulin was because that was the application. Not only did they teach about prayer and meditation, but it was also how you learn to do the application of all of the things that you're learning in there. And so he had one woman raised her hand, and I remember listening to the question. She goes, I really find everything that you're talking here to be just fabulous. She goes, I really do want to pray and meditate and go through this application in the small group, but I just don't have the time. I have a family to raise, and I'm a single mom, and so she kind of trailed off from there, and Yulin says, think for a moment just what it is that you're finding the time to do. And then think about what the advantages would be if you could just carve 10 minutes out of your day to add prayer meditation to that, to your system, and be able to start applying everything that you have out there from the 2 hours a week that you would have in study group, and then make the choice from that. So what do we have the time to do? And according to Christine Caine here, it's non-negotiable. We don't have to wait until we think we have the time to do it. It's like make time. I never chose to have children, but I definitely understand when you say there's never a good time to have children. You can't say, this is the perfect time to have it. Actually, I can say, my wife and I have been married 36 years. I'm thinking in about another 10 years I'll be ready. What do y'all think? Yeah, maybe there's some other problems there. But it definitely need to make the time and to do it now. As to the application of that gain, and it's my emphasis in the parentheses to make sense of this, as to the application of that gain from living in his presence, or that may be gained from the study of those things given, each must answer for themselves. I really want to get into how important this individual program of trying to get back to God is for each and every one of us. It is so unique, so individualized, and we can't even begin to judge somebody else as far as how they're going about it or say, you need to do this or that. Especially when you come down to, Cayce was asked one time, should we create a religion or a theology out of the information that comes from these readings? And Cayce's answer was, do not do that. You would become, the organization would become a laughingstock if you tried to make a religion out of this. What its intention is if you are a good Catholic, you become a better Catholic. If you're a good Jew, you become a better Jew. If you're a good Muslim, become a better Muslim. It is only supposed to enhance that which has already appealed to you, that which you were drawn to. And when I say drawn to, not just mentally, we were drawn to incarnate into lifetimes that went in that direction. So we've made a choice like that on all different levels. So each must answer for themselves. This information is not to say we're going to go and do a church over this whole thing, but we are going to figure out how to become more loving, patient, cooperative, etc. in everything that we do. You know, one of the interesting things that you hear about the last judgment, but according to the Cayce readings, there is at the end of each life a life review. That is not a last or final anything. What you do is you literally get to re-interview, if you will, in every exact moment, decision, choice that you made in the entire life that just went by. Now remember that there is no problem with time or space, so you say, well, isn't that going to take a long time? No, it can happen like that when you have no limitation of time or space or synapses in the brain. So you're able to go over to the other side and review every single event. And every choice that you have made comes up not from your own bias perspective, not even from the bias perspective of the other people involved in whatever choices or actions we took. You actually get to see the truth of it. And the truth of it being so much of it, and you said this is where we have the greatest problems in dealing with the life review, is not in the mistakes that we have made, but in the opportunities that we let pass. That is where the greatest angst comes up in our lives going, we had all these opportunities to take advantage of, and I just went, I'm so busy being a single mom and making meals and doing the laundry and all that I forget that I'm really here to try to figure out how to become a better person. So we each must answer for ourselves, but I bring that up to say, let's not let the opportunities pass that we have to become better people. We're going to take a break here in just a second, but I wanted to cover another Albert Einstein quote. He was, a lot of people say that Einstein was an atheist. I would call him an agnostic, in that he couldn't prove the existence of God, but when you read this, and I will, as a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene, being Jesus. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. Now, he's not saying that Jesus is absolutely the Son of God as in traditional Christianity, but he says Jesus is absolutely real. There is no myth when it's filled with such life. And the things that Jesus says and are in red ink in the Bible. So you take somebody who is, some people would call him an atheist. I would say agnostic, if you understand the difference between those two. Atheist says there is no God. Agnostic says, I don't know if there's a God or not. And again, if you're going to approach everything from a scientific method, you can certainly understand that. But again, this was an interview with the Saturday Evening Post. Notice how close that was to the stock market crash. Look at that date of October 26. In just a few days, the stock market crash was about to hit and start the Great Depression as we all know it. So fascinating timing as far as when all that would come out. All right, continuing on where we left off, follow rather closely in that which has been given. It is used the same as he gave. Him refers to the Father, he, the Son. In the preparation of the lessons, these may in the general be referred to in that manner, for as it is generally understood by the critics, or those that would prefer good English, him is rather inclusive, while he is definite, or the one Son. One of the reasons that I bring this up, when I write or speak, I've had people say, why do you always seem to refer to God with using male pronouns? And the answer is very easy for me, and it sounds like it's being reiterated in some ways here in this Cayce reading. And it's not that I believe God has a gender. I don't believe any of us have a gender. None of it. I mean, we were created in God's image. God doesn't have a gender. Therefore, that's not really an issue. But why would you wind up using he? And this is what I really ran into, because I've run this through my mind a lot over the years. And I would say, what does it feel like when I say spirit, creative force, first cause, mother, Father, Mother, God, all of these things that are, genderless as you go through that? The closest I ever came to it was Father, Mother, God, because it was the only thing that I could say that reflected the family relationship that I feel that I have with God. I needed to have it be a father or a mother or something like that in there to go into my human experience and say, who can you be the closest to? Now, the Father, Mother, God just seems like it, I almost feel like I'm falling over the words as I spit them out like that. And so I was trying to figure out, is there another way that I can convey the idea of having family with God without, trying to put so many words into it? And I took that into a meditation, and I got the answer, came very close into what you're seeing here, and it said, what did he do? And he being Jesus in this case. And God was always referred to as the Father by Jesus. You remember there was a time when he didn't refer to him? He said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? There's a good one to look up. That's, if you remember, I think I covered it last week. That is the first line of the 22nd Psalm. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Goes into a psalm that says nothing about it. Actually, it says a number of things. It's talking about an individual who is getting crucified, and that the people who crucified him are literally drawing lots or gambling for his clothing. Remember, they did that with the robe that Jesus had. And talks about how awful everything looks at that point. And by the end of the psalm, it says, as dark and awful as everything looks right now, everything is going to turn out perfectly wonderful because God always prevails. And so remember, when God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? When Jesus was saying that, and all the other verses in the book, he's talking about God as the Father. What do you think he's doing other than trying to he's going to be a man of few words when he's getting ready to die there, right? Can barely breathe, going through a crucifixion. I don't know if you know that. Did you know that from a crucifixion you die of asphyxiation before anything else? Because you put so much weight onto the cavity by hanging right there that you can't inflate the lungs to get the oxygen into your system. Anyway, he's a man of few words at that point, and so he gives that one line, knowing that everybody understood everything about the Psalms back in that time. So if they understood all of the Psalms, all you had to do is the way I like to do it, I have enough crowd here. Winston tastes good like, anyone, everybody can answer that, right? You can finish that line right there, even though we haven't had in over 40 years that line come up in a television commercial. We still remember it. So you can say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And they can fill in like a cigarette should at the end of that. So I just wanted to point out, in this, when we're trying to say, why does we have him to the Father and he to the Son, what we're trying to make clear here is that there is no gender for any of this. And it's interesting that as much of civil disobedience as Jesus demonstrated and how he worked, in his preaching, if you will, back in the time, that Cayce is saying, I don't care if you like good English or not. Him refers to the Father, he refers to the Son. One's inclusive, the other one is definitely the one. So he's just kind of being civilly disobedient himself in the reading there when they asked the question. I had a request for this last time, and I put it in here as far as I keep talking about this video that really describes where I think we are in the earth at this time. When we think that things are just all going to hell in a handbasket, at the same time, I think that just like we have, by the way, do you know we have, when you're seeing me record this, this isn't for 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 people. We now have over 240,000 views of these lectures worldwide. So, I mean, where you can't get people out of their homes to sit in seats like we have with you folks here right now, when you wind up offering this sort of thing to everybody that's out there where you meet all those objections, they get to sit in their nice comfy chair at home at the time of their choosing and offer them the right stuff. You have a lot of people very interested in this. The point being is that all of these like-minded people are literally bringing conditions about that can change just like that. You can change this world just with the thoughts if you have the right catalyst. Now, let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. I'll give a narration that goes along with this. So you take this bottle of water, as you have right here, and you put it in the freezer. I think it takes them 2 or 3 hours. You can't see it, almost 3 hours. And notice that it's 11 degrees minus Fahrenheit, but see that it's still liquid. You see him carefully taking it out of there. It's a liquid. Watch. He just thumps the side of it, and the entire thing turns into ice within seconds. You're going to see this happen in another few ways. We already have some ice there, so what if you pour that same water that just came out at that cold temperature on top of the ice? Isn't that amazing? All you need is a catalyst to be able to make this thing that so we have the spirit is the life like water, the mind is the builder like steam, steam then into water, and the physical is the result, and it turns into the physical ice at that point. So if you think of the water being the mental realm right there, and you have the catalyst turning it into the physical manifestations that we have, it can happen very quickly, even as mankind counts time, is the way the Cayce readings put that. I wanted to make sure everybody got to see that video because I refer to it all the time as far as what in the world. I mean, I love that. I call this God on a chalkboard. When you say all of the conditions are right, where we have like-minded people who want to manifest love and get along with patience and cooperation in everything that we do, and suddenly one day we're all going to stand up and say, enough. Let's get on with it. Let's do it right. We're not going to be the silent majority any longer. Okay, so on reading 32 and paragraph 18, the way may be heavy and his presence as of shadows, yet the shadows are only of thine own misunderstandings. And his glory will make for the glorifying of self in a service that brings more and more the knowledge of entering into the joys of the Lord. So when we're talking about how things are going on and you have ISIS or whatever in the world today, there's so many challenges, and we could point to particular isolated incidences like that and say the world is falling apart. Well, I can tell you it wasn't too many thousands of years ago that when we went to war, you would wind up killing everybody else, enslaving the survivors, and stealing their assets. Today, it's not that that doesn't still go on, but we are known to go in there and actually rebuild the infrastructure and try to set up a government to be able to carry on, as what happened over there in the Iraq War and all that. That doesn't mean that it happens perfectly, and it means that a lot of things can still go wrong. But believe me, that's a whole lot different than would have happened 2,000 years before in that same part of the world. We are making progress. And you see, especially when you have his glory will make for the glorifying of self. And remember, I talked about glory being the ability to serve. When you reread this whole thing, understanding his glory will make for the glorifying of self. So God is glorifying us, and we are expected to glorify God in return. And how do you do that? Well, we have to quit seeing shadows and actually seeing his presence. With the living of that given, all will come to the knowledge, to the understanding of we are in his presence, whether we acknowledge it in the present or not. For, as has been given, it is in him that we live and move and have our being. So what I alluded to earlier in the talk, that sometimes if you're worried, if you're saying, oh my gosh, what would happen if Jesus appeared in this room right now? How would I feel that, that he showed up right now and got to see me doing this? That's how come you go behind the barn to smoke a cigarette or take a drink or something like that, because you think that there are places that he doesn't look. Well, the idea is we are all in his presence at every single moment. So if we understood how that winds up working, that at every single moment, why don't we start making better decisions now instead of picking and choosing our battles at when we're on our best behavior? If we start constantly, consistently making choices saying, this is the time, this is the day the Lord has given, let us rejoice and be glad in it, as the Bible says. We wind up saying, this is the time right now that we need to start measuring up, and that we do it. We start living according to what we believe. Now, this is, I need to clarify this. This question, as opposed to coming from the group in general, is coming from the person, just like 262 are all the readings that are the Search for God readings. 413 is the number that was assigned to this individual so that they can remain anonymous. All right, so person 413, insert whatever their name is here, asked the following question. Have I applied the past lesson sufficiently to entitle me to a place in his presence? Interesting answer. Each should recognize that heritage, that all are entitled to a place in his presence. For he wills that none should perish, but that all should come to the acceptable understanding of his Spirit, bearing witness with thy spirit. I'll tell you, I'm surprised that this question could even get asked by, it'd be almost like when you read that thing of the mother of the two disciples said, can my sons sit to your left and right hand when you're in heaven? Jesus is like, what? I mean, how do you have an understanding that says somebody can have a preferred position in heaven over somebody else after you've been listening to everything that I say right here? And that's exactly how Cayce answers this. What do you mean you're entitled to a place in his presence? All are entitled to a place in his presence, and it just comes around to the fact that God is not willing that any of us should perish, but guess what? We each in our own way, in our own free will, are going to have an acceptable understanding of his Spirit at some point in the future, each in our own choosing, in our own time, in making our own choices. So you have an interesting way of, I think, that line that says we all get into heaven leaning on the arm of somebody that we have helped. So it doesn't matter where you're coming from. I'll share with you, I have an anecdote note up there too from a reading that I had that mentioned, because I was asking questions about prosperity and how I had so many challenges with it earlier in life, and then when I was asking these questions, I got to a certain point in my life and I never had problems with prosperity again. And I said, why is that? And it had to do with a particular individual who was very challenging to me. They were an atheist, but it was a challenging situation because this person and I got along really well as long as I was doing everything they wanted me to. All right? As soon as you start to go in a different direction, it was like you get the full wrath of whatever. And this is a very wealthy guy. Even back in the 80s, he was worth a couple of $100 million. And it was when I came into, his environ that I really was able to go ahead and get a hold of a prosperity consciousness. And I asked what was the interesting relationship or even past life relationships with this individual. She said her answer in the reading was, this is a very interesting relationship between you two. Even though you do not see things the same spiritually, you have found that you work very well together financially. I got to say that's the truth. He and I truly do work very well together financially as far as how to make things happen. She goes, you take turns preceding the other into the incarnations that you come into, probably like 10 years ahead, and the one person gets themselves established and then acts as a mentor to the other person to bring them into prosperity into that lifetime. And yet we do not share any of the spiritual things that go along there. We don't get along spiritually at all in the way that we think of things. In fact, in this, the gentleman's still alive. in this particular lifetime, his parents were in the concentration camps back in World War II. And both of them became atheists because they could not believe that God would exist and allow something like the Holocaust to have taken place. And so that was where they just, yep, that's it. We throw God and the baby out with the bathwater and the whole thing. But it does not stop from being able to figure out how to, all things work to good for those who love God. You wind up having all things work out, even if he and I don't share the same spiritual background, that you can have two people like that still help each other in other ways. Chapter 12 with the ... is just picking up from a sentence in there. Whereas in water, the face answereth to face. So in his presence must our deeds, our thoughts be reflections of him. Not in that of long-faced or in mourning or in sorrow, but in gladness of purpose, of service, of worshipfulness in him. You know, one of the, and this is always a tough one for me because I would watch The Greatest Story Ever Told. I think I was less than 12 when it came out. And you see this thing and you just see the horrible, you know, from the time that he's arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane to being beaten and humiliated, and then he has to carry the cross down the road up to Mount Calvary, and then he's, you know, crucified and he dies on the cross, and you're seeing that he responds to this, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the lesson of that. Do you know that Cayce says that when he was carrying the cross on the way to Mount Calvary, he laughed and joked? That was never, ever in the greatest story that ever told, greatest story ever told in the movie, or other depictions that I have seen of it. Never once did it show anything but somebody who is absolutely at the end of their rope. You couldn't imagine how they could go another step. And it said that Cayce said that he laughed and joked. And then he said why. He goes, two reasons. One, can you imagine, as long as Jesus, according to the Cayce material, Jesus had been working for a very long time, not just 33 years, to be able to come to this pinnacle of that lifetime, of living a life of perfect love that can be the perfect role model for all time, had been working on that for a very long time, and he was that close to completing it. And he knew it. I mean, if you have God incarnate in a physical body, and he knows if he's omniscient and omnipotent, and he knows he's that close, he's like, I am almost there. The other one is he wanted to make it clear to the Romans and the Sadducees and Pharisees that kind of put him along that road that he was still in control. You can do all of this to me, and I am still able to come up with laughing and joking, and I have almost accomplished everything that I want to do despite you doing the worst that you could to me, and here I am. You know, you can't do any worse than this, and yet I am still in control of my own life and my own situation. So you wind up, what that gives across to me is that it doesn't matter when life is throwing its worst at you. When you have the worst things that you've ever encountered, it is simply a matter of us understanding that this is either our opportunity to be of service and a role model of how we are for others, or it's saying we are given the opportunity to be able to figure out how we have things that are challenges for us personally, and we're being given the opportunity to figure out how to become stronger along those lines. Here's just an answer to the question. You'll figure it out once you go into this. In his presence all stand. And as that we see reflected in the mirror of life shows what manner of shadows are cast. So does keeping in the consciousness of the indwelling of the Spirit of the Master keep all in the way of truth and light. So in the underlined portion there, that we see reflected in the mirror of life shows what manner of shadows are cast. So we keep talking about his perfect presence. You know, this is so, if you've ever had a philosophy class and had the dialogues of Plato and Aristotle and all that. And Plato's whole vision, if you are, is we are sitting here in a cave where we have the bright, day outside of us, and there's a fire. And this fire is just behind us, and it's casting these dimly lit shadows on the walls. Everybody heard the analogy of Plato's cave is what it's referred to. And so our reality is just seeing these kind of dancing shadows going around on the wall just from this fire casting the shadow out there when there's this beautiful, infinite, wonderful world just outside of the cave if we would just go step outside and go live that life. That life is available to us, but we have to realize it's there to get our butts up off the floor of the cave and go see something else. So when we sit there and talk about reflected in the mirror of life and the manner shadows are cast, that's really kind of what it's referring to. It says, or we see light through a glass darkly, as Corinthians 1:13 talks about. We only see this reflection very shadowy, very dark as far as what is going on out there, but it is really reflecting who we are and what we see in life. So if we don't, does that mean that bad things can never happen to us if we're on a good spiritual path, if we want to be loving, if we want to be joyous? Or does that mean that bad things do not happen? And the answer to that is, of course not. Does it look like good things only happen to Jesus? You only have to ask that question every single time, or you're going, if he is the way, the truth, and the life, how in the world did all of that stuff go wrong? We can choose to put ourselves in harm's way in order to glorify God and be of service to other people. So yes, you don't have to have it karmically coming to you to have bad things happen, but you could have chosen at some point to say, I'll go ahead and put up with this just so other people can see how to, how you can deal with things when you have God's love as being in your mind and how you make choices. Okay, I'm going to explain life. And there it is. Imagine that this is an infinite three-dimensional labyrinth right here that you have, like if you've ever heard of logic trees. Logic trees that are where you say you have a choice and this is the path you go if it's yes, and this is the path you have if you choose no, or true or false, or I'm going to date this person instead of that person, or I'm going to take this job instead of that job. You see what I'm talking about? And then suddenly you have a whole different path depending on which one you are going to go through. Now, if this, here's the question. If this is representative of the infinite number of choices and paths and things that can ever happen to us throughout eternity, and let's see, I say that these are all the good and loving ones that are above this line right here, and all the ones that aren't loving, all the ones that we find distasteful when they happen to us are below this line. And if all of these are all up there on the screen at the same time, does that mean that one exists and the other doesn't? This is an interesting question because it really starts to answer, you hear these things about all of the sins of the world God will strike from his book of remembrance. You're going, what does that mean? Does that mean God can forget something? And I'm thinking, there must be something else. That would be God limiting God's self. And so God, doing something like that, or working against his own laws, doesn't make any sense to me. But what I'm saying is all of these choices are always available to each one of us. They are always there to be had. And so we'll take a look at something. Let's say that we enter into the earth plane and these red marks right here are us going from one lifetime to another, and we've been making bad choices, and then suddenly we start making better choices and we go up into the loving area in which we are now living a life like Jesus did. Now, when you're looking at this, it said, does this go away? This is the path that our consciousness took in order to get there. Does this go away, or do we always remember that forevermore? And I think this is what it's talking about, and it says God strikes something from the book of remembrance. I don't think it goes away. I think it quits bothering us. I think we see it as being the lesson that allowed us to get back on the right track again. Now, if instead of this choice right here, we just started to go down, in this path in a different way, then that would start to be something that we had focused our consciousness on. But I think after we wind up getting on the right track again, this happens. It doesn't mean that it's not still there. All those paths that I just took right here are still there. Not one of them is gone, but we don't live there anymore. It's almost as if we went back here and said, you know what, when I had the choice to go down here, instead, what if I made a good choice and I stayed above the line and I only had good things happen to me from then on? I'll give you an example. Anybody ever watch Star Trek? This one actually comes from, I think, the series called Deep Space Nine. And the first episode of the thing has their captain, and he goes into this wormhole, doesn't matter, he runs into these infinite beings, these beings that live without time or space limitations. And what they're trying to do is to understand what it means to be a limited being, to be a physical being. And so they're taking this captain through memories in his life. And they have this memory of the first time that he met his wife. And then they go horseback riding, and they're on the beach, and when she tells him that she's pregnant, and when they have the kid, and they're going, these are all wonderful times. He goes, yes, these are the favorite times of my life. And then all of a sudden they go to this next scene, and his wife had been killed in an accident on one of the spaceship, when they were on the same spaceship. And he's going in and he's trying to see if he can save her, and she dies right there in front of him. And then they go back to, another one of the wonderful scenes in which, they were together as a family, or when he had, graduated from the Starfleet Academy, and then it goes back to when his wife was killed again. And then another good thing, and a good thing, back to when his wife was killed again. You liked it when your wife got killed? And he goes, no, it was the most horrible, horrendous thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And then the eternal beings go, why do you live here? Now think about that for a second. Why do you live here? Because he's living all these wonderful memories that are out there, but he keeps going back to this horrendous memory that he has. And wonderful thing, boom, right back there again. Well, guess what? This is what it looks like when we keep going back to the awful memories that we have. And when we finally attain the Christ consciousness, it doesn't mean all those past things don't still have the potential for us to go back to if we want. But if you are really in tune with things, you stay up there above the line. And you don't live there anymore. And it's as if that choice never actually happened in the first place.